Welcome to the All Sorts podcast, your passport, really, to uncharted territories of understanding. Imagine stepping into like a hidden grotto where every echo reveals a deeper truth, every shadow holds a fascinating story. Today, we're embarking on just such a journey, plunging into the captivating reflection of narcissism mirrored in the enduring myth of Narcissus. This ancient tale isn't just some dusty relic, it feels like a live wire, still sparking debate and shaping how we see ourselves and our relationships. So, our mission on this deep dive, to explore the shimmering surface of the myth and the complex depths of the psychological concept, we want to try and distinguish timeless wisdom from, modern interpretations. Our sources for this exploration range from the whispers of antiquity to the detailed landscapes of contemporary psychology, and even some artistic expression. Okay, let's unpack this.
It really is remarkable, isn't it? How a story from so long ago still feels so relevant. The myth of Narcissus, Ovid's version is probably the most famous. It introduces us to this figure of just extraordinary beauty. He was the son of the river god Cephasus and the nymph Liriope. And there was this prophecy, a pretty stark one, from the seer Tiresias about his fate.
Oh, yeah. What was the prophecy?
Basically, that he would live a long life, but only if he never truly knew himself.
Wow. Only if he never knew himself. That's quite a condition. And this incredibly handsome young man, maybe ironically, he just left a trail of broken hearts, right?
He did. He rejected many admirers. And among those he scorned was the nymph Echo.
Ah, Echo. Her story is fascinating, too. There's that whole thing with Hera, isn't there?
Exactly. It's quite tragic, actually. Hera cursed her. Apparently, Echo used to distract Hera with lots of chatter while Zeus was off, consorting with other nymphs.
Sneaky. So what was the curse?
Hera made it so Echo could only repeat the last words spoken to her. She couldn't start a conversation, couldn't express her own thoughts freely.
Oh, man. Imagine that frustration. Only reflecting, never initiating.
Right. It created this huge barrier to any real connection. So when Echo encountered Narcissus in the forest, she was immediately smitten.
But she couldn't tell him.
She couldn't. She was trapped. She could only mirror his words. He'd call out, who is here? And all she could reply was, here.
That must have been maddening for both of them in different ways.
Totally. It was full of misunderstanding. Eventually, Echo revealed herself, tried to embrace him.
And Narcissus, knowing him,
he rejected her. Brutally. Just pushed her away.
Ouch. You can almost feel that rejection. And poor Echo, what happened to her then?
Well, heartbroken and literally voiceless in a way, she just began to fade. The myth says she wasted away until only her voice remained.
Just an echo in the woods. That's such a powerful metaphor, isn't it, for unrequited love, maybe, or being unable to express yourself?
It really is. But the story doesn't end there. Nemesis, the goddess of revenge, saw Narcissus's cruelty.
Uh-oh. Payback time.
You could say that. She led him to this perfectly still pool of water. And when Narcissus saw his own reflection,
he was captivated.
Instantly. Utterly mesmerized by its beauty, he fell deeply, deeply in love with the image staring back at him.
What a twist. He rejects everyone else only to fall for himself. But wait, that's an impossible love, right? It's just an image.
Exactly. He couldn't touch it, couldn't embrace it, couldn't connect with it in any real way. This longing was completely unattainable.
So what did he do? Just stay there?
His infatuation just took over everything. He couldn't pull himself away from the pool. His desire for this image that could never love him back just grew and grew. And ultimately, he just despaired. He died right there by the water's edge. From thirst, starvation, just staring at his reflection till the very end.
That's incredibly tragic, all that beauty ending like that. And isn't there something about a flower?
Yes, the final symbolic transformation. The myth says his body, or sometimes his blood, turned into the narcissus flower.
The daffodil. Huh. That beautiful, maybe slightly aloof-looking flower, forever tied to self-obsession.
Precisely. Though it's worth mentioning there are other versions of the myth.
Oh, like what?
Well, Pausanias, for example, he offered a different take. He suggested Narcissus wasn't looking at his reflection out of vanity, but out of grief.
Grief? For who?
For his deceased twin sister. Apparently he looked exactly like her. So his gaze at the pool was more about mourning her loss, longing for that connection.
Wow, that changes things, doesn't it? It adds this layer of sorrow, makes it less about pure self-love and more about maybe loss and identity.
It does. It gives it a different, more complex shading. It shows how these myths can be interpreted in various ways.
So it wasn't just Ovid's story, then?
No, there were others. Parthenius talks about Narcissus taking his own life. Philostratus analyzes the painting of him. Longus even has this pretty grim version where Echo is torn apart by animals driven mad by the god Pan.
Yikes. Okay, maybe we stick with Ovid's version for now.
Well, Ovid's version, especially with Echo's part in it, is definitely the one that most directly influenced how we talk about narcissism in psychology.
Right. Okay, so let's bridge that gap. How did this ancient story, this myth, actually give birth to a modern psychological term? That seems like quite a leap.
It does, but the core theme is the key. That excessive preoccupation with oneself, with one's own image. The term narcissism started popping up in psychological writings in the late 19th century.
Really? That early?
Yeah. Though initially, people like Necki and Havelock Ellis used it in a much narrower sense. More about treating one's own body as a sexual object, a sort of sexual perversion, as they saw it then.
Okay, so a very different starting point from how we tend to use the word today. Interesting how these ideas evolve.
Definitely. Then, in the early 20th century, the idea broadened out. Otto Rank connected it more generally to vanity, self-admiration, and Ernest Jones came up with that very striking term, the God complex.
The God complex, right? That paints a vivid picture. What did he mean by that?
He used it to describe extreme narcissism. Traits like aloofness, feeling incredibly self-important, being overconfident, and having this deep need to feel unique and just better than everyone else.
Sounds familiar, unfortunately.
Then, of course, you have Freud. In 1914, he published his big essay on narcissism. Freud suggested we all start with primary narcissism. It's like our basic psychic energy, the libido, is directed towards ourselves when we're infants.
So he saw it as a normal stage, like everyone goes through it.
Yes, exactly. A normal, even necessary developmental stage. It's part of learning to love yourself before you can, love others. He also talked about secondary narcissism, which is when libido gets pulled back from the outside world and directed back onto the ego. He saw this in certain psychological states.
Okay, so Freud saw a kind of baseline self-focus as normal, but then this more intense, inward-turning kind as potentially something else.
That's a good way to put it. Then, a bit later, Robert Wilder, in 1925, he really helped shape the idea of narcissism as a personality trait. He described it as involving condescension, feeling superior, needing admiration constantly, and, crucially, a real lack of empathy. He wrote this detailed case study about an aloof scientist that was pretty influential.
Lack of empathy seems key.
It really is. And then Karen Horney, in 1939, she proposed thinking about narcissism on a spectrum, from healthy self-esteem all the way to, pathology.
Yeah.
And that idea, the narcissism spectrum model, viewing it as a continuum, is still very much how many experts see it today.
That spectrum idea makes a lot of sense because just being confident or, caring about how you look doesn't automatically make you a narcissist. So how do psychologists generally define it now?
Generally, it's seen as a self-centered personality style, an excessive preoccupation with yourself, your own needs, often at the expense of other people. But again, it's crucial to remember the spectrum. A moderate amount of self-focus can actually be healthy. It helps with resilience, ambition, self-care. It's when it becomes extreme and flexible, really pervasive, like a narcissistic personality disorder or NPD, that it causes significant problems.
Right, NPD, we hear that term thrown around quite a bit. How is that different from just having, say, strong narcissistic traits? Where's the line?
Well, narcissism generally shows up in two main ways, or expressions. There's grandiose narcissism and vulnerable narcissism.
Okay, what's the difference?
Grandiose is probably what most people picture, sometimes called thick-skinned. These individuals usually seem to have really high, maybe inflated self-esteem. They feel superior. They're often attention-seeking, exhibitionistic, maybe manipulative.
Right, the classic stereotype, almost.
Kind of. Then there's vulnerable narcissism, or thin-skinned. This is different. It's marked by more fragile self-esteem. These people can be hypersensitive to criticism. They feel a lot of resentment, maybe envy. They might withdraw socially because they feel ashamed. But they can also be quite needy, maybe even vindictive if they feel slighted.
So outwardly very different, but still under the umbrella of narcissism.
Yes. Despite the different presentations, the underlying core is often described as self-centered antagonism or entitled self-importance. This involves selfishness, that strong sense of entitlement, the lack of empathy we mentioned, and a tendency to devalue others.
That lack of empathy, again, it seems central. And you're saying this isn't just about ego, it really affects how they treat people.
Absolutely. And these tendencies can show up in specific areas, too. People talk about sexual narcissism, this inflated sense of sexual skill or desirability, or parental narcissism, where parents see kids almost as extensions of themselves. Workplace narcissism, Constant self-promotion, challenging leadership, maybe being counterproductive.
Wow, it can really permeate different parts of life.
It can. Even relationships often become toxic dynamics with demands for admiration, that lack of empathy, sometimes that cycle of idealizing someone then devaluing them. There's even talk of celebrity narcissism, sometimes called acquired situational narcissism, linked to fame and adoration, and, of course, social media. It can be a stage for self-promotion, seeking validation, which for some might link to emotional instability.
It sounds exhausting, frankly, both for the person and everyone around them. And I imagine for someone actually diagnosed with NPD, these patterns are even more deeply ingrained.
Yes, exactly. When it reaches the level of a personality disorder, it's pervasive, long-standing, and causes significant distress or impairment. The official diagnostic criteria, like from the Mayo Clinic or the DSM-5-TR, they list things like a persistent pattern of grandiosity, needing excessive admiration, lack of empathy.
We keep coming back to that.
It's key. Also, believing you're special and entitled, having fantasies of unlimited success or power, believing you're superior, being critical of others while expecting special favors yourself, taking advantage of others, feeling envious, or believing others envy you, being arrogant. It's a whole cluster of traits.
That's quite a list.
And there's more. Difficulty handling criticism, impatience, anger, problems with relationships, maybe intense rage or contempt when challenged, trouble managing emotions and stress. Sometimes withdrawing to avoid potential failure. And often, underneath it all, despite the outward show, there can be depression and these secret feelings of deep insecurity.
That's a really important point, the potential insecurity hidden beneath the surface. It makes you wonder what causes these traits to develop in the first place. Is it nature, nurture?
It seems to be a complex mix, as usual in psychology. Twin studies do suggest there's a genetic component, some heritability to narcissistic traits. But childhood experiences are definitely thought to play a big role. Some research links the vulnerable type more to things like adverse childhood experiences, emotional neglect. The more antagonistic parts might be linked to abuse or instability, grandiose narcissism. Well, sometimes it's linked to parents overvaluing the child. Too much warmth, maybe, but the findings there are a bit inconsistent, honestly.
So no simple answers from childhood either.
Not really. And then there are biological factors being explored. Neurobiology. Some studies link grandiose narcissism to differences in brain regions involved in self-enhancement, reward, social dominance. Vulnerable narcissism sometimes shows opposite patterns in certain areas. Hormones like testosterone are looked at. And there are evolutionary theories, too, like the hierometer theory, suggesting maybe grandiose traits helped in navigating social hierarchies way back when.
Fascinating. It's such a complex puzzle. You also hear narcissism mentioned alongside other terms, like the dark triad. What's that about?
Right. Narcissism is one of the 3 traits in the dark triad, along with Machiavellianism being manipulative and strategic, and psychopathy, which involves callousness and antisocial behavior. They're grouped because they share features like manipulativeness and low empathy. Sometimes people even talk about the dark tetrad, adding sadism, taking pleasure in others' suffering to the mix.
Dark indeed. And these traits aren't just individual. You mentioned collective narcissism.
Yes. That's the idea that a whole group can have this inflated self-love and sense of superiority. It's related to ethnocentrism, but it can apply to any kind of in-group, not just nations.
So it seems like the whole field of studying narcissism is still very active, lots of debate.
Oh, absolutely. There are ongoing controversies, like how do you clearly draw the line between normal and pathological? What's the real role of self-esteem? Is it high, low, fragile? How best to classify subtypes? What are the absolute core features versus the peripheral ones? What are the exact causes? How best to measure it? Even how it should be represented in diagnostic manuals like the DSM. There were huge debates around the DSM-5 revisions for NPD, for example. It's complex territory.
It really is, which makes it even more striking how casually we use the word narcissist in everyday life. Is that popular usage very different from the clinical understanding?
Hugely different, yes. And that's a really important distinction our sources, like discussions on Reddit or in Strike magazines, bring up. The term gets overused, often misapplied. True self-love, caring for yourself, accepting flaws, wanting to grow, validating yourself without needing constant applause, that's fundamentally different from narcissism.
Oh, so?
Well, narcissism, as we've discussed, is more like self-worship, a belief in your own perfection, feeling entitled to adoration, and often it's actually masking deep shame or insecurity. The Reddit discussions pointed out that people with strong narcissistic traits often harm others for their own gain and might secretly hate themselves, whereas self-love is constructive. It doesn't need to exploit anyone. And the Strike Magazine's piece highlighted that someone practicing genuine self-love can actually admit they have flaws, areas to improve. That's often incredibly hard, maybe impossible, for someone really high in narcissism.
That's a critical difference. Healthy self-care versus something potentially harmful and exploitative. Okay, what about this other term that came up, echoism? Is that the opposite?
Echoism, yeah, it draws its name right from the nymph echo. It describes a pattern of behavior, often in relationships, marked by passivity. Difficulty asserting your own needs or desires, a strong tendency towards people-pleasing. It's very related to codependency. And you often find this pattern in people who are in relationships with individuals high in narcissism.
Ah, like Echo herself with Narcissus.
Exactly. The Paleothea article talks about that struggle with unvoiced emotions, mirroring Echo's inability to speak her mind. Psych Central clarifies it's not a formal diagnosis, but it's a learned pattern where someone consistently puts others' needs way above their own, often out of a need for approval or fear of rejection.
Wow. So the myth of Narcissus and Echo really does give us this powerful framework for these two extremes, doesn't it? Narcissism as this isolating self-focus and echoism as almost vanishing in relation to others.
It really does. And it highlights the need for balance. Ultimately, you need a healthy mix of self-love and empathy for others to have well-being and good relationships. Like the Paleothea article suggested, too much self-absorption leads to isolation, like Narcissus. Too much self-effacement leads to vanishing, like Echo. Finding that middle ground, valuing yourself, and having genuine empathy and connection, that seems to be the key.
So as we kind of surface from this deep dive, what are the main things you hope people take away?
I think, firstly, just how powerful and relevant that ancient myth still is for understanding this really complex psychological idea of narcissism. Secondly, the absolute importance of distinguishing healthy self-love, which we all need, from pathological self-obsession, which can be so destructive. And finally, maybe thinking about that contrast with echoism and how it underscores the need for balance between looking after ourselves and connecting empathetically with others.
This has been incredibly insightful, really digging into the myth and the psychology behind it. It definitely makes you think about your own balance, doesn't it, between self-reflection and empathy. Are you finding that equilibrium, or maybe leaning a bit too far one way or the other? It's definitely food for thought. And now, as our deep dive into the myth and mind of Narcissus draws to a close, we want to extend a heartfelt invitation to you, our fellow explorer of knowledge. If this journey into understanding captivated you, if your curiosity sparked for more exploration into these vast landscapes of thought, we'd be absolutely thrilled if you'd support the All Sorts podcast on YouTube. Just a simple click to like, maybe share it with someone else who loves to dig deep, and hitting subscribe, it genuinely helps us keep bringing these explorations to you. And remember, our library is full of other fascinating deep dives. Each one is like a portal to a new realm of understanding, just waiting for you. And if you want to continue the conversation, delve even deeper, you can find the All Sorts podcast community active and thriving on X, Instagram, and Threads. Come find us there, share your thoughts, and let's keep unraveling the world's mysteries together, one fascinating deep dive at a time.